A very warm welcome to today's Movers and Shakers virtual event. My name's Lee Natasha Salter and I'm Managing Director for Movers and Shakers. We're absolutely delighted. We've got almost 1,000 people booked onto today's event. We've got a large number of newcomers. We've even got people who are watching today from America and from the Middle East. So welcome to you all. For those of you who don't know Movers and Shakers, we're the UK's leading property networking forum. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year, and we're really passionate about connecting our members, enabling them to do business and putting on first-class speaker events. We've of course had to postpone our physical events at the moment for a few months, so we've created a programme of Movers and Shakers virtual events, which we're really enjoying. And if you've missed the last couple of events, we've already uploaded those to our Movers and Shakers YouTube channel. So all future events will be uploaded there. Please subscribe and please do take a look. All of our live events are currently free of charge so that they're accessible to everybody in the industry. So we've got a series of events for you. We're providing webinars, which are panel sessions, Monday morning motivations to kickstart your week, a programme of market insights, and like this morning, some views from the top, interviews with chief executives. So today we welcome for our first views from the top, a good friend of Movers and Shakers, Chris Grigg, who is Chief Executive of British Land. Chris is going to talk to us today about the market, the challenges, the way forward, COVID-19 and beyond. Now, I'm sure most of you do know Chris. He's been at the helm of British Land for about 11 years, previously a banker. British Land is one of the largest developer investors in Europe, and it has over £15 billion worth of assets under management. Now, to chair today, we have Melanie Leech, CBE, who is Chief Executive of the British Property Federation. So welcome to you both. Thank you very much for joining us. And how it's going to work this morning. So you've got half an hour now for questions, which Melanie will field to Chris. A few attendees have provided questions in advance, and you do have a Q&A tab on your screen now. Please do send in questions, and I know both Melanie and Chris will take a look and try to include as many as they can during today's discussion. So without further ado, thank you, Melanie, thank you, Chris, and to all our attendees, please enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee, and good morning, everybody. This is the first of these type of events that I've done, so I'm very excited to see how it works, and I'm extremely excited to, my first webinar is interviewing Chris Grigg, who is a past president of the BPF and a strong supporter of ours in addition to his many other roles. And Chris, I wanted to start off just by asking you, what it's like trying to run a business like British Land in these extraordinary times, both for you personally and for your team and the organisation.
If you think about that question, I guess the first word that comes to mind is intense. And I think that the nature of that comes from at least a couple of places. First of all, I think moving to a world of running the business from home itself brings a whole bunch of kind of behavioral things which are a bit different from sitting in the office. So that's been interesting. And then of course that sense of crisis, that sense of trying to recognize the pressures our customers are under, the pressures our people are under, our communities under. Yeah, I think it's that kind of confluence of things that's made it a pretty intense experience, but so far so good.
And thinking about your customers, you mentioned your customers, how are you responding to their needs? What are the kinds of things that you're doing to support your customers at this time?
Well, we've tried to be as realistic as we can about the situation that our customers find themselves in. So as an example, if I look at the kind of providers of restaurants, bars, food and beverage on our big campuses, and indeed at our shopping locations, particularly independent, smaller businesses, all the way through to kind of hairdressers and the like. What we've tried to be is very supportive, and we were relatively early on to actually offer people rent holidays because it seemed to us they just weren't going to be able to survive. And then at the other extreme, we've got retailers who are open on our sites, and we would expect them, and pretty much by and large they have paid their rent. So it's been a range of things in our office business. By and large, we've had a positive experience of people paying rent, but I wouldn't want to kind of gloss over the fact that it's been tough.
And how have your tenants responded to that approach from you? I mean, have they been proactive in welcoming and wanting to engage, or have you found some people just sort of trying to put the duvet over their heads and not engage with you?
Well, I think the first thing to say is, there's just a lot. Ours is a big business, as you mentioned, and so we have hundreds of customers, all in different situations. Although we've tried to kind of block them in the way that I described, and so just the business of being in contact with all of them has been very hard work for a big swathe of our people, and that's sort of happened on two levels. Obviously, effectively to the kind of head office, that may of course mean no more than a single shop, all the way through to big businesses. So we've needed to be in touch with them on the ground and often at head office level. So that again has been a challenge for us, but often an even bigger challenge for them, frankly, because they've been closed. They too have had a huge amount to do. So I think it's been logistically quite challenging, but I have to say our people have done a terrific job getting through and talking to a huge number of people, often in multiple times.
Thank you. My next question is one that's actually come in from the audience, so that's fantastic. So please do keep your questions coming on the chat line. But I think so. Moving on from what you're doing as a business, do you think that the government is going to step in and provide additional support to help you in that case?
I think we've got to be realistic, haven't we? The first thing to say is that I think the government is under colossal pressure from a huge number of directions, and they will make mistakes. I mean, that's the story of every crisis. It's the story of every big event. People just don't get everything right, and some of those things are going to be kind of scandals. Some of those things are just going to be they can't focus on everything at once. And the second thing that I think we all have to bear in mind is the cost to the government and therefore to the country of all these things is just phenomenal. You think of the latest number I saw that we've got probably 9 million people who are going to be looking to be furloughed. I mean, that impact on the government's finances is like nothing that the governments have experienced in peacetime, I think, certainly in kind of democracies. So I think we have to see what they can do in context. And Melanie, you've been a big part of that process of trying to engage with government, trying to make sure that they understand the potential costs for our industry, and also to understand that we're not a bottomless pit, and just pushing the toothpaste around the tube may work for a short period of time, but just isn't going to work in the long time. Frankly, I'd be interested in your view as to where you think they're coming from, because you've got at least as good and probably a better perspective on that than I have.
Well, I think I hear everything you say, I agree with it, and I think we have to be resourceful, and that may be about what the government can do to help us in spending targeted additional financial support that complements the existing schemes but doesn't require a huge extra bill. So I wonder whether there are sort of things around planning easements, just keeping the system going and making sure we're well positioned for recovery, as much as spending money that could be used. Yeah,
that's my instinct too. I mean, I think I've had a number of conversations with government in the last couple of weeks, I suppose, and two things. One, whenever you talk to them, they sound absolutely exhausted as individuals, and the second thing is, I think it's easier to make points around, as you say, planning easements, where there isn't an immediate hit to government than it is to try and get them to invest some more money. But I think they do recognise that over time the pressure and on our industry is just going to go up and up.
Yeah, no. And how long do you think this is going to last, and will it have a long-term impact for us, do you think? I mean, crystal ball time. I know you don't have an answer. None of us have an answer of it. What's your sense of it?
I don't know. I think my crystal ball feels particularly murky right now. I mean, I think, I think it's very strange to find ourselves in a position where the government is under such two distinct pressures, isn't it? On the one hand, to get going again in terms of the economy, and on the other hand, to keep things closed up in terms of deaths, and they'll probably overcorrect one way or the other, and probably wrongly. But it feels like we're not going to see anything of material until right at the end of May, maybe into June, is kind of where I think in their heads they want to be. But I suspect they'll be more conservative than maybe we might expect, arguably just because they probably look back and think they weren't quick enough into this. And I think, as we all know, we all have a tendency to kind of overcorrect. If you've made a mistake in one direction, there's a slight tendency to do it in the opposite next time around. So if I was a betting man, which in a weird sense I guess I am on this topic, then I think it'll be a while. I think what's more interesting is what happens and what form back to work takes. It's obviously something we're spending a lot of time now thinking about in our own business, and trying to think about that in a couple of stages. The physical business of getting everything back up to speed in whatever format that's going to look like, and then how long do we get back to a kind of, let's call it a new normal as opposed to a new abnormal, to pinch the wording that others have used. It's kind of weird that we only actually have one of our places, including our retail places, closed, even though we have a very small number of shops open. Each one of them has to have some shops open. That's kind of good and bad in some ways in terms of getting back. All of our office buildings are still open. Again, we've got a few that are quite full. Most of them are pretty empty.
Yeah, and it feels as if you're anticipating there might be a sort of phased release of the lockdown. So how do you plan for that as a business?
Well, what I've been saying to the team consistently, in as much as you can be helpful in these circumstances, which they may or may not agree that that's mine are helpful comments, but we've got to spend more time on different contingencies than getting too stuck with one plan, because I think when you've got so much uncertainty, it's never a good idea to believe that you're going to, the view that you hold, you can't hold it with complete confidence. So we've been trying to work at different phases, and a lot of that is just bringing all these buildings back into a shape good enough, particularly around things like cleaning, and so on and so forth, and trying to contingently plan that. I think the other thing is, what we're certainly trying to spend a decent amount of time talking to people in other markets, China in particular, elsewhere, in Asia in particular, because it feels like they're further through. So picking up on some of the habits and some of the experiences of our friends around the world feels, a smart thing to be trying to do.
And how are you working with your customers on that? Because then there's one thing to sort of say that things are open again. It's yet another thing to make buildings ready to be occupied again. But then there's also the sort of the human bit of it. There's how we all will behave in response to that. I mean, it's not a given that even once we're allowed to go back to something more approaching normal life, we'll do that. Are you thinking about, how the human part and how we'll all behave, as well as the physical fact of getting things ready to be back to normal?
Yes, we are. Our working assumption is that people will not come back with the same density that they will, whether we end up with two teams, as in the way that was happening quite a lot before we finally locked down, or whether we businesses take decisions around three teams, unclear. But I think you've got to assume that there's going to be less density, that there's going to be more phased working in terms of during the day. We've got probably a bit of an advantage. We've got very modern kit, and we don't have too many high-rise buildings. I mean, clearly in China, what you're finding is one of the big issues is lift capacity. Now, that's not such a big deal, clearly, if you have buildings of 5 to 7, 8 floors, than if you have buildings of 35, 40 floors, when lifts are in reality going to be absolutely required. But I think it's those sort of deeply practical things, and then listening to our people and trying to talk to our customers. I would say that on balance, it's a grotesque generalization, but our junior people are keener, and who are usually younger, are keener to get back to the office than others, because working from home is harder for them. You've got to believe that tells you something about what's going on, but it won't be a perfect proxy for our customers.
Yeah, just building on that, quite a few questions coming in, which I could characterize as, for the longer term, are we seeing the death of the office? Are we all going to increasingly, now that we've understood what it's like, work from home, will that impact on the requirement for office space? working practices and so on. It's crystal ball time again, you know, looking longer term beyond sort of a period when we have to operate in a sort of hybrid version. Do you think this could last, this new way of working, in some or greater fashion?
Yeah, what we've tried to, we've tried to think about this is, you know, what we will see is trends accelerate. So, for example, in retail, you're likely to have more retail will have gone online quicker than might otherwise have happened for obvious reasons. You know, there's no doubt that we've been seeing more flexibility in the way that people have used offices over the course of the last few years. And so I think that trend will likely continue and will likely accelerate. But when you actually boil it down, a lot of the reasons people use offices are actually to do those things which are very hard to do from home. I think we definitely proved we can do more from home. But if I think of things like recruiting, trying to do that at a distance, trying to build culture around businesses, those are really, really hard things to do. You know, check how people are, people's well-being. That's a really hard thing to do. You know, if I ask you how you feel today, Melanie, you go, I feel fine, Chris. You know, most of those kind of subtle things that we as human beings are very good at picking up on, you lose that in this sort of format. And so, you know, I'm more optimistic that offices will continue to be critical, but likely they will be critical in a slightly different way. And as I say, that's towards acceleration of trend.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about offices. So, and you just touched on retail and accelerating existing trends in retail. So one of the questions that's come in, do you think this is the end of the secondary high street? Do you see that retail trend accelerating to quite a significant extent?
I don't think there's any doubt that the pressures that this pandemic has created will, as I said before, accelerate some of these trends. And so I think high streets around this country, and likely many other countries too, are going to have to find a different way forward. And I think, you know, you touched on it, Melanie, I think rightly. How we get through that is going to be all about alternate uses within those high streets. And, you know, I think the capacity for local authorities, or is it central government, big question, you know, to help that process of changing use. You know, does it probably make sense to have more healthcare in town centres than has been the case? Probably. Is that easy to do with the current planning system? No. You know, some of those things I think will have to change. You know, do I think this is the death of physical retail and F&B? No, I don't. Will it look different? Yes. Will some of the trends we've all been talking about look different? Yes. Now, if you look at the numbers, you know, there's something like 1.5 billion square feet of retail in the UK. You know, you're talking about most of that's on high streets. Most of that's occupied by independents. That's going to change a lot, I think. So we're just going to have to see quite a lot of shops close over time, and we're going to have to see alternate use. I don't think it's any longer acceptable to believe that's all going to be about charity shops and the like. It's going to have to be change of use.
Another question that's come in linked to that, and thank you for all the questions that are coming in. Please do keep them coming. In that transition, obviously, we're going to have a lot of temporarily vacant premises. Do you support the view that the government should be supporting landlords with empty rates liabilities and potentially introducing a 12-month holiday?
I do. I think it's quite important. I think if we don't do that, you're going to see a lot of landlords, particularly small landlords, frankly, under colossal pressure. And I think that's a bad thing, not just for our industry, obviously, but more importantly for the regeneration of those cities. So I think change of use could potentially be, you know, medium-term lifeline for the people who own that real estate, which after all could have just as much value, or nearly as much value at least, in another format. But not if you can't get the planning to do that. And in the near term, it feels like we need some help to get through that process. And if we don't get that help, you know, the recovery will be that much less. The ability to spend or invest in terms of development, you know, which will end up being incredibly important for the recovery whenever that actually takes place. You know, that's going to be slowed down. So I think that's an example of where government, if you like, investment today can have a real longer term benefit. I know they're very concerned about propping up industries that should fail anyway. This is a very different example, I think.
Yeah. Just moving on then, shifting the focus slightly. Could you just talk a little bit about what impact you see having to manage through coronavirus having on your development projects going forward, both existing and potential future ones, I guess?
Yes, it's obviously been an area of our business which has probably attracted, if you like, in some ways more attention than you would think, because what the process of development, what the construction guys are doing, in some cases we've actually had, it's probably the only area of our business where we've had any negative feedback from social media, where people have seen, particularly early on, where developments weren't maybe closed down quite as quickly as might have been, just in one case in particular, and where people saw, building workers congregating outside the building, which we dealt with as quickly as we could, but it's just a good example. So I think, A, quite high profile, B, for obvious reasons, very important again for the recovery of the economy, because the supply chain of these businesses is quite fragile. So if we do damage today, it's hard to know what will happen. But generally speaking, with those two caveats, we are now starting to put ourselves in a position, having closed virtually all of our sites, we are now opening on a selective basis, where we can get assurances and where we can check on social distancing and all that stuff. But you know what, the sort of productivity that we're achieving is kind of, call it 10 to 20% of what would have been possible. But in some cases, luckily, in most of the big projects, we've got a couple of big projects nearly finished. Actually, that's enough to get us over the finish line, if you like.
What's your crystal ball telling you about the future of the construction industry through all of this? Do you think that the smaller construction companies are going to be able to get through this in particular?
So that's a great question. I think it's a hard answer to give. Again, I think unfortunately, we keep on coming back to how long the lockdown lasts. I think, for a period of time, we're going to be okay. These businesses will find a way. But once, the cash really runs out, and by the way, that's one of the reasons that we've been anxious to try and restart where we can, to kind of get the cash flowing as much as anything else, and therefore help to protect over time that supply chain and all the implications it has. But I think if we lock down for a long time, that's going to be hard to recover from, as elsewhere.
One of the issues that's been raised is the extent to which the public sector can help with that, because government, spends a lot of money, builds a lot of stuff, invests in a lot of stuff, and whether government can, if you like, pick up the reins on that, where the private sector might need to delay plans, then the government can step in and drive actually activity in construction. And you saw obviously the announcement about High Speed 2, and maybe that's a good example of the government being able to use its power to get things moving again.
Yeah, government does have the advantage in this particular case that it doesn't, have to say, well, we've got to earn a return on this, or we've got to make an estimate of what if you like, to take that example, what are we going to earn out of fares from HS2 over in 5 years' time is not something that government has to focus on. If people are putting up new houses or new offices or new retail, then they're going to have to figure out, rents and prices. That's going to be hard. So I think government can and should make a difference, but that's very different from all those projects that typically are being supported by our industry at any one period of time. And I think it would be foolhardy to imagine that the government can wholly stand in that space.
A few questions coming in about the attitude of your lenders. Have your lenders been supportive to you? And do you sense that there is a real sort of understanding of the position you're in and a willingness to support you?
Yes, in one word. I mean, we're in a relatively fortunate position. We're a big company. We've run our balance sheet very conservatively, ever since the GFC. So people are very comfortable with our gearing levels, and by the way, we don't have interest cover test covenants and the like. So we start from, we don't need to refinance until 2024. So that's a good position. I'm not going to say it's a fortuitous position, because the team have worked very hard to put us in that position. Having said all that, on top of that, The banks have been very supportive. We just extended the facility, which is obviously, you know, one of those good things. It's good housekeeping, but it's quite a statement in today's world. And then on top of that, obviously, it's nice to have access to the bank CP facility. So put those things together, we feel to be in a very good position at the current time. We're also conscious that not everybody will be in that position.
You mentioned that you've put yourself in a good position, and I guess a number of companies are in a better position than they were in 2008. But how do you compare and contrast 2008, the global financial crisis, with today?
There's a friend of mine who said that having lived through 2008, he never thought that he would use the words dress rehearsal for a subsequent crisis, but he felt empowered to use those words about this crisis. And I think it did make me smile in a sort of what could be best described as a rueful way, because, you know, it's true, right? This is a much broader impact. If I cast my mind back to 2008, it was very scary if you happen to be close to the middle of things. For most people, it barely registered, at least at the time. You know, you look at what happened to economic activity, it dropped a tiny bit, but below zero. But now look at the numbers we're seeing and how broad this impact is. So very different is the thing I would say, and a very different perspective, and it'll have lots of different knock-on effects. But then equally, every crisis is different. I think there are things to be learned from the last crisis, you know, and hopefully, I think we've, as a business, tried to really take some of those learnings from different people within our business who had different experiences, and make sure we've applied those rigorously as much as we can. Actually, by the way, ironically, some of the crisis management testing we did, you know, around things like Brexit, around things like terrorism risk, have actually also served us well, I think, particularly in the early days of this crisis.
We're coming to the end of the session, so this is my last question to you, and it's really about values. It's about ESG, if you like, sustainability, you know. So how do we take the lessons from this and apply them, I think, to the climate emergency? How do we make sure that we're looking after people and we're not exacerbating inequalities in the way we're responding and treating to this? How do you feel about that basket of issues, and how do we demonstrate our values? As you know, the BPF has a campaign, Redefining Real Estate, which is all about trying to make sure that we not only get credit for all the things we do as an industry, but that we really live our values. So how are we going to live our values through this and out the other side?
Well, I think we're going to have to be very thoughtful about this, aren't we? I think one thing that strikes me already is that the capacity of companies and even individuals to damage their brand by their actions, if they step away from some of the stuff that you've talked about just then, Melanie. I think we've seen, you know, the amount of criticism that Branson takes, the amount of criticism that Ashley took. You know, those are things which I'm sure are being discussed in boardrooms around the country. They're certainly, and around the world, I know for a fact, and certainly they're on our mind. And I think people will judge us arguably far more by what we actually do in these critical areas, right across not just the climate emergency, although clearly that is, you know, arguably the most important of all, but just how we treat people, how we treat supply chains, as much as all of that's going to be, I think for me, one of the lessons of the GFC was that the willingness of press and others to go back over that history and really pick at what people did wrong, you know, is a lesson, I think, that you're already seeing playing out again. And, you know, some of you may have seen this thing with Philip Pullman, you know, writing around the possibility that you'd actually kind of take the government to court for murder in terms of some of the decisions that were taken about PPE. I mean, that is a different world than the one that you would have seen a decade or two ago. And so I think every business, larger or smaller, is going to have to really think about this, albeit there will definitely be some box ticking. There will definitely be some, you know, lip service given to some of these things because it was ever thus.
Great. I apologise to everyone who asked a question that I couldn't get to, but I found that absolutely fascinating, Chris. So thank you so much.
Thank you
for responding so candidly to my questions.
And thanks for all the questions. I appreciate it. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. Thanks both, Chris. Thank you, Melanie. Tremendous, just as I expected, really. A very insightful kind of overview, very pragmatic actually, of what's going on in the real estate industry and what will happen going forward. And I think, you know, we really don't know, but you both made it very human. And, you know, it is nice to hear that everybody makes mistakes. And I like that the way of you described hybrid working going forward, because I think you're absolutely right. The human element, you know, we can't check in people when they're working from home. People are social, you know, people will want to go back to work, but technology might make things easier to be a bit more flexible. I think there's so much coming out of this, and I love the values piece at the end. So thank you both. And I think I'd also like to see another session where Chris interviews Melanie. I liked it when it slightly turned the table. I think we need to do one of those. So we'll keep you posted.
That would be a good plan.
Go for it. Brilliant. We'll keep you to that. So we'll be uploading today's event on our YouTube channel, so do take a look. Thank you to all of our audience today. Thank you to Chris. Thank you to Melanie. A reminder that our next event is on Monday the 27th at 10:30, our first Monday morning motivation. So this is going to be a series of insights and inspirations from property people. We've got 3 individuals that are very passionate about what they do. They're going to talk to us and give us their insights and inspiration on Monday. So thank you again. Do register online and stay safe. From our family to yours. Thank you.